Aha. I was running around looking for my notes. I think I could preach this one without notes, but I'm glad I found them. We are in Proverbs 25 tonight. Proverbs 25. We're working our way through all the Proverbs. Whatever day we're on, that's the Proverbs that we are going over. So today is the 25th, and we do Proverbs 25. I'm going to read all of them right now, and then we're going to kind of break down some of them here in a minute. Okay. These are also Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied out. Now, real quickly, the Proverbs are divided up. I don't know all the exact divisions, but if you look back in Proverbs 1, it says the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, and that's pretty much like a heading for the whole book here. And then it breaks it up. Let me see where the next one is. I guess that is the next one in chapter 25. Chapter 10, the Proverbs of Solomon. Somewhere there's a break here where another person maybe was recording them, writing them down. They're the words of Solomon, but somebody else is putting them together and putting them into the book as we get it. So then you have this in 25. This is the one that apparently Hezekiah, the king of Judah, copied out. Now, Hezekiah was like the great-great-great-great-grandson of David and of Solomon, because Solomon was David's son. And so, this would have been very special to him probably. This was, grandpa's wise words, all these proverbs. And so there's a division there. Then as you get towards the very last couple books, these are the words of Agur, the son of Jacob. Now, these aren't even Solomon's words. This is just and then these are the words of Lemuel in chapter 31. So that's just how they're all broken down. That's why he says all this. Okay, so these are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied out. And then he just jumps right into them. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. The heaven for height and the earth for depth, and the heart of the king is unsearchable. Take away the dross from the silver, and there shall come forth a vessel for the finer. Take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne shall be established in righteousness. Put not forth thyself in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men, for better it is that it be said unto thee, Come up hither, than that thou shouldest be put lower in the presence of the prince whom thine eyes have seen. Go not forth hastily to strive, lest thou know not what to do in the end thereof, when thy neighbor hath put thee to shame. Debate thy cause with thy neighbor himself, and discover not a secret to another, lest he that heareth it put thee to shame, and thine infamy turn not away. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver. As an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold, so is a wise reprover unto an obedient ear. As the cold of snow in the time of harvest, so is a faithful messenger to them that send him, for he refresheth the soul of his masters. Whoso boasteth himself of a false gift is like clouds and wind without rain. By long forbearing is a prince persuaded, and a soft tongue breaketh the bone. Now the rest of the chapter here is what we're going to focus on tonight. Hast thou found honey? Eat so much as is sufficient for thee, lest thou be filled therewith and vomit it. Now, this is all the Proverbs in this chapter are so picturesque. Withdraw thy foot from thy neighbor's house, lest he be weary of thee, and so hate thee. We're going to come back and go through these a little bit more. A man that beareth false witness against his neighbor is a maul, and a sword, and a sharp arrow. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a broken tooth or a foot out of joint. You know anything about that, David? Foot pain? As he that taketh away a garment in cold weather, and as vinegar upon nitre. I don't exactly know what nitre is, but when I looked it up, it said basically baking soda. Now, we know what happens when you mix vinegar and baking soda, but I don't understand to what extent they used that back in these days, but I guess it's basically the same thing that we call baking soda. So is he that singeth songs to an heavy heart. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. The north wind driveth away rain, so doth an angry countenance a backbiting tongue. It is better to dwell in the corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. Now, I didn't say that. That's in the Bible, okay? As cold waters to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. A righteous man falling down before the wicked is as a troubled fountain in a corrupt spring. It is not good to eat much honey, so for men to search their own glory is not glory. He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. Now, it's hard to preach chapters like this where everything just seems so sporadic. So I try, as I just start reading through it over and over, I try to look for things that stand out to me or whatever. And often it's verses that repeat themselves somewhat. Now, you might have noticed in this chapter, twice it mentions eating much honey. So I said, well, maybe there's a significance between the first time it mentions that and the last time it mentions that. And so I looked through. Now, I'm not meaning to imply that the author or God, under the inspiration of the Holy Ghost, that God wanted it to be broken down quite like this. But here's what stuck out to me as I was studying this. And I think it's really a good point, easy way to break this down from verse 16 to verse 28. I'm going to preach a fairly brief message here on too much of a good thing. Too much of a good thing. Now, anybody know where the origin of that phrase comes from? I looked it up just out of curiosity. Too much of a good thing, because that's a phrase that I've heard before. And they attribute it to Shakespeare. Now, we see it in the Bible, so I know that it predates Shakespeare. But those exact words, too much of a good thing, is in one of Shakespeare's writings. And so it's been passed down. I've heard some colloquialisms, how do you say that? From that word, from some other countries that have a similar idea there. And it's the fact that too much of a good thing could be a bad thing, right? Too much of a good thing. And I read something where they had a play on that, and they said, too much of a good thing is wonderful. No, because too much of anything can become a bad thing. I think about too much of a particular food, which is in this case what it's talking about, honey, which we'll get to in a minute, but too much of a particular food. My wife recently made me for my birthday one of the most wonderful cakes I've ever had. I like peanut butter, and this was a peanut butter cake layered with frosting, peanut butter frosting on each layer. Then the whole thing was coated with peanut butter frosting. On the top there was a ganache, peanut butter's kind of ganache, something. And then the whole thing was rolled in like peanut butter chips. I mean, peanut butter on peanut butter on peanut butter. You say, was it too much peanut butter? Not at first. I loved it. I was eating it up. But when I was done with one, maybe two, fairly good-sized pieces of this cake, I felt like I was going to throw up. It wasn't the cake. The cake was good, but I said, I can't take another bite. I think I'm going to throw up. Plus, maybe have something to do with the milk and the coffee that went with it, or all the food I ate before it. I don't know, but I was starting to feel sick. And you could probably relate to that. People have, I've heard stories. I know this is from my sister. When she was little, to this day, she hates bologna. Because when she was little, she sat down, she loved bologna, and she sat down with a whole package of bologna and just ate one after another. And when the whole thing was done, she's like, I can't ever eat bologna again. Now, that doesn't always happen, because you think about I've heard of people, I want to say my dad has a story like this from whenever he was little, but he got caught smoking. And they said, oh, you're not supposed to be smoking. You think you're going to smoke, huh? I'll teach you. And so they make them like smoke a whole pack right in front of them. And they thought, oh, that'll help them. No, now they're addicted to the thing, right? So that doesn't always work. But eating too much of something. My dad also said whenever he was little, he loved ketchup. And so one day he said, I'm just going to drink some ketchup. I guess like V8, like a real thick V8, right? He drank it. He said, to this day, I can't stand ketchup. I'll never eat ketchup again. Because too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Too much salt. I like salt in my food, but if somebody stubs their toe and gets too much salt in there, it's kind of hard to eat. Unless you got some mashed potatoes to go with it, like that ham the other day. It was, I'm getting hungry. I better stop talking about food. So let's move on here. So in the Bible, in this passage of Scripture, from 16 down, I believe there are 6 things. Now, 6 points is a lot of points to make in a message, but they're going to go pretty fast. I believe there are 6 things that in this passage of Scripture, it says, it's teaching us that too much of these things is a bad thing. All right, so I'm going to jump right into it, starting in verse 17. I'm going to go ahead and read the verse about honey again. Hast thou found honey? Eat so much as is sufficient for thee, lest thou be filled therewith and vomit it. Okay, now look at this one. Withdraw thy foot from thy neighbor's house, lest he be weary of thee, and so hate thee. Now that sounds kind of cruel, but I think all of us can relate to somebody maybe who's overstayed their welcome. And you don't want to be on the side that says, that's rude and tell somebody. But I think the purpose of the message, what I would want to get across is we should try to make sure that we never do that. Now, and that's not to say company is good, all right? And so this is the point. Company is good. Fellowship is good. We should always fellowship. In fact, the Bible says, so much the more as you see the day approaching. What it's saying is get together, have church services. I believe in fellowship and after church. We like to have potlucks and stuff like that. I love that. We get around fellowship. I love whenever it seems like nobody wants to leave and everybody afterwards just talking and don't ever think that I'm trying to rush you out. I love that. Or they stand right outside the door, but everyone's talking. That's great. Fellowship is good. And you have somebody over to your house maybe on a Sunday afternoon, that would be great. Sunday night after church, whatever, I think fellowship is good. But we all know that there can be a time when somebody, like, okay, it's time for you to leave. I've had people over till really early, like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and we're talking, and you're giving every hint you can. You're just like, oh, well, getting kind of late, isn't it? Yeah. And then they just keep talking. Now, I've been guilty of it myself, so understand me now. This is for me as well. We have to realize there is a time when we could have too much of company, too many phone calls. Somebody just always wants to call you or text you, and you're like, okay, calls and texts are good, but you kind of overstepping your, your liberty, taking advantage of that phrase, what's mine is yours, or make yourself at home. Now, they're my in-laws, so I'm sure the story is completely different. But I got to a point, when I was first, dating Valerie, I was always, I asked before I do anything, and it was almost like overly cautious to do that. Now I go to their house, and I'm in my slippers, and I go right in there, I open up the refrigerator, see what they got, and that's okay because they're my in-laws. But you don't want to be so comfortable like that around people. You can overstay your welcome in too much company. So that verse there says, withdraw thy foot from thy neighbor's house, lest he be weary of thee, and so hate thee. I mean, wouldn't you rather like to be, well, I better let you go. It's getting kind of late, and you're getting your stuff together. Right? And they're like, no, please, really, I want to talk to you some more. Well, that'd be a different story, right? But we should be willing to forego that and leave whenever we think that our time is up. Verse 19, I'm going to skip over 18, I'll bring it up later. Verse 19, oh, by the way, all these start with C. I don't always try to do that, but I like it whenever it works out that way. All these, if you're writing it down or something, it'll be easier to keep track. They all start with C's. Too much company. Verse 19, too much confidence in somebody. Okay, verse 19 says this: confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a broken tooth or a foot out of joint. Now, it's a good thing to give others the benefit of the doubt. It's a good thing to have confidence in somebody, to trust them, allow them to do their job, even if you think they might mess up when they're doing it. Specifically, if you're training somebody or it's your child, it's okay that I gave this child and I don't mean this like my kids do these things. I'm just throwing this out here. You give the child the responsibility of vacuuming the house. And you know that when they're done, you're going to go back and redo it for them, or mowing the yard. I just saw somebody recently on Facebook posted a picture of their grandson was mowing the yard. And he's a little guy, and the lawnmower's like this, and he's pushing, and he had flip-flops on, and some women got on there and got mad. Make that boy wear some shoes. And so then he later posted another video and said, okay, in this video he has shoes, okay? because moms are out there, don't like kids mowing without. But he's pushing, and the guy said, the OCD in me is just hating this because I'm watching his lines are like this, and he's missing patches and stuff. But he's learning how to do it. And so, that needs to be done. I think that's something that's good. That's something that we should do is give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe somebody messed up before. Well, they're never going to be able to do it right if you don't say, hey, I know you messed up before. We worked on that. We talked about it. Now I'm going to give you another chance. That's a good thing, right? But there does come a time. If you're paying somebody to do a job, if I'm paying somebody $40 to mow the yard, which is about what they charge you now, and they'll 5-10 minutes. They got one of those zero-turn machines, and they get that thing done in like 5-10 minutes, and they'll charge you $40 for it. It's good. It's right to expect that they did a good job. You don't need to just always just let them, oh, it's okay, just overly confident, overly gracious to them about that. There's a time that you're expected to do what they have you do. Trusting somebody with a known past. Let's say they're a thief. They've got a record of being a thief in the past. It's good to, help them to be restored and help them not to have problems with that. But putting them in charge of your money would be a dumb thing to do, right? Because they've proved themselves to have a problem with that. And I've seen that many times where someone gets another chance and they go back and they do the same thing again. It's certainly possible. So we got to be careful not to have too much confidence in somebody. Notice in that verse there in verse 19, it says, in time of trouble. Okay, so the idea there isn't talking about, don't ever put confidence in anybody, but putting confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble, it's going to come back to get you. It's going to cause pain, and it's going to be a terrible situation. So remember, we're talking about Proverbs. We're talking about wisdom. Some of it's even secular wisdom. It's not all super spiritual wisdom, but these are just good things and practical things, for us to consider. You don't have to worry. You don't have to just put overconfidence in everybody and allow them to do things. Okay, number 3, verse 20, too much cheerfulness. Some people aren't cheerful enough, but here in verse 20 it talks about what I'm calling too much cheerfulness. As he that taketh away a garment in cold weather, and as vinegar upon nitre, so is he that singeth songs to an heavy heart. You all seen what happens when you pour, the little kids do the experiment of the volcano, and they put the baking soda in there, and whenever the vinegar touches the baking soda, then the volcano erupts. So that's the idea. You got this undisturbed thing, like baking soda. And then you put vinegar on that, and it just starts to bubble, okay? Or what was the other thing that it said? taking away a garment. And now somebody's cold, right? So they've got an extra layer of clothes on, a coat maybe. And if you were to take that away from them, that's a terrible thing. Now they're miserable, right? And so he's comparing these two things, and he says this is what I get from it, at least. If you are going around singing just happy songs to somebody who's of a sorrowful spirit, you could overdo it. And you could be like this situation, like taking a coat from somebody who's cold, okay? Now, let me explain this. Proverbs 17:22, why don't you go back there a couple chapters here. Proverbs 17:22 says this, a merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. So there's nothing wrong with trying to cheer somebody up. That's good. If somebody's down and depressed and we're trying to cheer them up, we're trying to help them out, that's good. But what we're seeing here tonight is that too much of a good thing can be bad, okay? So how about this? Somebody's hurting. I mean, just really tore up. There's no way they can be cheered up. And you kind of just going up with this annoying smile. It can happen. You can do that. I'll never forget. I think I shared this once before. My best friend, I mean, we never got in fights. We always got along. And my best friend growing up, one time he was having problems with his dad at home, and his dad was just, just made him mad. And he was out there just so upset. And I remember just sitting there with him, kind of like one of Job's friends, just like waiting for the right time to say something. And I don't remember if I was whistling or what, but I remember he just got so mad at me. And he was like, what are you looking at? Or what? And I was, whoa, I'm not doing anything, right? I'm not the one that's that has a problem here, So why should I have to be sorrowful with you? Well, there is a time when somebody is sorrowful, they need to go ahead and be sorrowful. And you can do what you can to cheer them up, but let's say they're in a lot of pain and you're just singing songs and whistling, it might not be appropriate. There might be a time to just be silent, let them, or maybe, somebody's talking. This happens a lot. I've noticed in the ministry, sometimes people, they want to talk and they're not necessarily wanting you to say anything even or give them your wise counsel. They just want to unload, right, and release some of that steam, And we got to be careful that we're not always just bouncing back with a, hey, think positive, well, be positive, well, do this, do that. It could maybe just not be what they need to hear. So talking to positively, I know that sounds bad because we know that that's a good thing, but what we're talking about is too much of a good thing, all right? So let's move to the next one. Verses 21 through 25. I called this one too much correction, all right? Is it right to correct somebody or to notice that somebody's doing something that's wrong and want them to do right? And all you can think about is, I just got to make sure they're doing right. I got to set the record straight. I got to make sure everybody knows. We got to be careful because that could lead to other problems. Verse 21 says, if thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat. And if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. Now, I'm not going to labor on this next point because this is our favorite part about this passage. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. But no, the point is, as far as this message is concerned, the point here is, yes, they're your enemy. But that doesn't mean, there's never a time to give them something. Whenever they're hungry, give them food. Whenever they're thirsty, to give them a drink of water. I mean, yes, we could preach another message on the benefits of doing that or how you could win somebody over or whatever. But the idea here is hey, there's a time to just go ahead and be gracious to them, okay? The north wind driveth away rain, so doth an angry countenance a backbiting tongue. Now, here's what will usually happen. Somebody just constantly thinking about how somebody did something wrong to them. Next thing you know, it's blowing up and it becomes worse thing than it really was. And next thing you know, they're wanting to tell everybody about it, right? And so you see in this several places in this chapter talking about backbiting and all. And so here's what gets rid of backbiting: an angry countenance. If somebody comes to you and they're wanting to gossip and they're wanting to talk bad about somebody, they're wanting to say, hey, this person, do you know what they did or whatever? If you've got this look on your face that's like, Don't tell me gossip. I do not want to hear gossip right now. They're probably going to leave you alone. If you pull one of these, like, oh, really? You know what I found out? And you're just like feeding it? Not good. Okay. So it says here that an angry countenance, as the north wind driveth away rain, so doth an angry countenance a backbiting tongue. It is better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than with a brawling woman and in a wide house. Yeah, we laugh at that. She's telling me don't go there. Yeah, we laugh at that because this sounds kind of funny, but here's the idea. And they're using a wife. They're using a wife in this illustration, maybe for a good reason. But men can do the same thing to their wives. Or someone can do that to their friend. Or you can do that about your boss or whatever. Or your boss can do that to you. But the idea is this. Is it right if you're doing something wrong? For an example, for the sake of the illustration here of a wife. If I do something wrong at my house, is it wrong for my wife to say, you shouldn't do that? No, that's a good thing. We're talking about too much of a good thing, right? So Brother Dave Hardy from, he's an evangelist now, but he used to pastor out in Tulsa? No, Stillwater. Tulsa, his son is in Stillwater. And Tulsa, anybody know Dave Hardy? Yeah, his son. I know his son is another Hardy, Wayne Hardy. But anyway, he said this one time, and at first I didn't quite get it. But he told his wife when they got married. He said, "You can tell me anything you want once," something along that line. You can tell me anything. If I need to hear it, I appreciate it. I want to hear it. If I'm done wrong, you can tell me I did wrong, whatever he said, but do it one time. And the reason he said, and that sounds maybe a little cold, but the reason he said that is because after a while it becomes like nagging, becomes like, there's another thing that talks about the dripping. After a while it's like, stop it. It can be that way. And so we don't want to get to that point. Is it right to correct somebody that did something wrong? Yeah. Is it wrong? Is it right to tell them, hey, what they did was wrong or whatever? Yeah, but here's what happens when you keep saying it over and over and over and then they don't listen to you. My wife doesn't do this, by the way. Everyone keeps looking to see her reaction. She's good about this. She doesn't nag me. But and they just keep on going. Here's what happened. Next thing you know, the guy is like avoiding the wife because she's always, and he's avoiding her. He doesn't want anything to do with her. He's trying to find ways to get away. I do get away a lot, but that's not right. And so that could happen. So what? So now what? Now he's not there anymore for her to nag. So he talks to her friend. You know what my husband does, and I keep telling him this and that. Now it's backbiting. Now it's all these other things that we're seeing in this passage. And so as far back as let me see here, I skipped that one verse, false witness. I'm going to throw that in here. A man, in verse 18, a man that beareth false witness against his neighbor is a maul, a sword, a sharp arrow. He's doing damage to somebody by just bearing false witness and doing this. Okay, and then we talked about backbiting in verse 23. In 24, we talked about this brawling woman and then talked about nagging and all. So, as cold water to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country, right? We want good news in our conversation, not just always bad stuff about people and whatever. So it's good to correct somebody, but too much of a good thing is a problem. The Bible does tell us to speak the truth in love. It says, but speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. That's Ephesians 4:15. 2 Timothy 4:2. Preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with long suffering. So even pastors, they're told to, there's a time to rebuke, and there's a time to exhort, and there's a, so even a pastor can get to the point where it's like, all right, you preach on that every service, and you keep hammering it, and we don't want to hear it anymore. And so this is a wise thing about not having too much of this. Okay, moving on down the list, number 5. I wrote on this one, too much conceding. All right, look at verse 26. A righteous man falling down before the wicked is as a troubled fountain and a corrupt spring. I mean, you think about going to a spring, you're thirsty, this water looks sweet and wonderful, and you go to get a drink of it, and it's nasty. It's really bad. Well, that would be the equivalent of a righteous person just falling down before the wicked all the time. All right? And then this is the way I took this when I read it, is it bad to yield to others? No, it's not. It's a good thing. The Bible talks over and over about how we should be meek. That's the key word, I think, is meek. Moses, the Bible says, is one of the meekest men. Now, next to Jesus, I'd say Jesus was the meekest, right? But Moses was a meek man. And here's what that means. That means Moses could have whooped Korah. When Korah came to him with his complaints or whatever, Moses was a strong man. He was a mighty man. He was a well-trained, probably military man. Probably could have whooped Korah or anybody else that came up to him and complained. In fact, you see what happens when he gets mad and he makes the people drink the golden calf. He crushes it in powder and makes. Only a strong man, a mighty man, would be able to make people do that, right? He's a strong man, but the reason the Bible says he's meek is because even though he was capable of doing this, he chose not to, okay? Some people are really good with cutting somebody down with their words. They're very witty. They're very, they could just really cut you down. And sometimes maybe that's even fun to get the upper hand in a debate or something like that. But we've got to be careful that we don't get to the point where we're always doing that. We should be meek. We could say something right here that would really cut you down. I got something on you. I could really cut you down. But because God wants me to be meek, I'm going to reserve that. So that's a good thing, right? But we don't want to get to the point where we're just always just letting people get away with stuff, letting the wicked just continue being wicked, and the Christians like, no, I need to be meek. I need to be humble. I can't say anything. No, there's a time where we need to correct. There's a time where we need to speak out. So we don't want to just concede to the point of just letting other people do whatever they want. I told you I was going to download an MP3. How many know what that MP3 is? Down an MP3 file of the Art of War, because we're talking about that in Sunday nights, knowing the enemy. And so I've just kind of got interested in this book. Now, it's secular kind of wisdom. It's not the way a Christian necessarily ought to fight their battles, but it's interesting stuff. And soldiers, warriors, generals, commanders, whatever, have been studying the art of war for many, many centuries, okay? And so I was listening to that while I was running. I was listening to the Art of War, just an audio book. Somebody's reading it out loud, and he said one of the things in there was talking about the commander of an army or whatever. And it says, obviously, I'm paraphrasing, of course. Obviously, he needs to be somebody who the people respect and the people love, and they think, hey, he's a nice guy, we like him. If your leader's not like that, then he's probably not going to be a very good leader to you. But at the same time, he said, you can't be so much that way that people get away with doing whatever they want, right? A good leader would say, no, we're going to put an end to this right now. He says, if not, in the way that he said it in the Chinese culture, was that they'll become spoiled brats. So you'll have an army full of people that just always get their way, always want, you know what I mean? Because he never laid down the law and told them and put a stop to that, okay? So we don't want to be so conceding and so super uber meek that we never put a stop to anything. And Jesus is a good example of that. Jesus was the meekest man that ever lived. And what did he do whenever he saw the temple of God being turned into merchandise? He fashioned himself a whip, drove them out of there, turned over the money changers' tables, and took care of business. He's still a meek man, obviously. You think of all that he put up with. He is still meek, but he wasn't overly conceding, okay? And then the sixth point is this: too much conceit. I probably could have found a better word, but I started with C. Too much conceit, all right? Now, conceit doesn't necessarily mean conceited in the sense of just always thinking about yourself. And I would say even to have a good image of yourself, to know what you're capable of doing, and be willing to know what you can do and what you have done is not bad. There's nothing wrong with realizing that. You don't have to just beat yourself up all the time and think, well, I'm not worth anything. Having a positive image of who you are is not a bad thing. But of course, too much of a good thing can be bad. And so it's a really thin line to cross sometimes. But you get to this point where you're wanting others to praise you all the time, and that's all you're seeking is just more praise, more praise. You know, I used to, a long time ago, I downloaded a lot of sermons from old-time preachers. Lester Roloff, anybody ever listen to some of his messages? Jack Hyles, guys from the 40s, 50s, stuff like that. Even Frank Norris, some of his messages. And I listened to some of these old preachers. And it was weird because one message, they'd just be humble, spirit-filled. The preaching was just like, oh man, I can see why this was one of the great men of God, just such a wonderful preacher. I mean, he just really fed the Bible and he did all that. And then I'd listen to another message and I was really turned off because the whole message would be like, and I did this, and over my years of ministry, I won this many people to the Lord, and I did this, and I built this great empire, and all the talking was just like the head. You could almost see it. And I thought, oh man, God's going to bring this guy down, if he keeps on doing that way. And then the next message would be just great, humble, and it was just like up and down. And we had to be careful sometimes, like know what you're capable of, know what God's blessed you with, and what you're able to do to use it for Him. It's kind of popular to in churches for people to say, hey, let's all recognize what our talent is, our ability that God's given us. Some people have the gift of helps where they can help people. Some people have the gift of teaching. Some people have the gift, what they call the gift of prophecy, or basically the gift of preaching the Bible and sharing the truth of the Bible. The gift of giving and the gift of, there's all these gifts. And some churches will say, hey, we need to recognize what our gifts are. That's not bad. It's not bad to say, well, I think I have an ability to teach. If I know something, I want other people to know it, and I just feel like that's the gift God's given me. I need to work on that more. You recognize where that is. That's good. But then there's a thin line where all of a sudden you're like, well, I want them to tell me how good I am at this. I want to be recognized some more, okay? And so look at this. It says in verse 27, it is not good to eat much honey, so for men to search their own glory is not glory. Right? Let another man praise you, and not you yourself, is what the Bible says. In fact, elsewhere in the chapter at the beginning, he said, put forth not yourself, in verse 6, in the presence of a king, and stand not in the place of great man. He's saying, why would you want to go and present yourself as something high? That's only setting yourself up to be chopped down, right? But if you'll take the lower seat, and then somebody says, no, come up here. That's glory, right? But it's not glory if somebody's given themselves the glory. It's just like eating too much honey. Well, honey's good, but not if you eat too much of it, right? So too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, we love you. If there's one thing, Lord, that we can't get to,